Hi everyone. So good to see you all again. I'm so excited about this book. I'm really thrilled to be teaching you and talking to you about Think and Eat Yourself Smart. And as the title says, it's about thinking, and thinking is such a vital component in eating. In fact, thinking controls eating. And you'll see one of the major themes throughout this book is that I'm not going to be teaching you a diet. I'm going to be teaching you how to use your mind to make good food decisions. So there's only one rule for eating, one rule, and that rule is eat real food mindfully. And that's what we're going to work on in this book. We're going to understand what real food is and what it isn't. And we're going to understand what it means to eat real food mindfully with your thinking. Just to show you how important your mind is in the process of eating, your mind literally controls your entire digestive system. The efficiency of your ability of your body to get nutrition from the food that you eat is dependent on how effectively your mind is working. So let's say that you are eating a really healthy pasture-raised chicken, roast chicken, and great fresh organic farm-to-table vegetables, but you happen to be really irritated about something in your life. Something is totally frustrating you, and you're bitter, frustrated, irritated, and that is a toxic mindset. Now, that message of your mind is going to literally impact how effectively your digestive system is going to digest that great meal that you've just spent time preparing. And let me give you an example of just one example, because we will talk about this quite a lot over the next few weeks, but I want to start with this example. Your digestive system has many parts to it, and one part of your digestive system is your pancreas, just one part, and there's multiple parts, and they all work together. And you can't have your body, one part not working well without it affecting the rest. They all work together as a whole. So I'm just going to give you an example of your pancreas. So let's say now you're in this bad mood, you've got this great food. But your pancreas now, because of your mind state, because you're irritated or frustrated or whatever it may be, because of that, your pancreas can't do its job properly, which means the gallbladder, your intestines, the whole digestive system is thrown out of whack. One of the roles of your pancreas in digestion is to secrete 20 different neuropeptides that are required for the assimilation and digestion of food. So when you are in that bad mood, your mind affects your pancreas, and your pancreas won't secrete all those neuropeptides, which means that you're not going to get the full benefit from that food that you're eating. So it's so important that you actually get your mind right when you're eating. So you're going to see, I'm going to stress mind throughout this book. When you eat, it's a metacognitive, it's a mind event. You need to pay attention to the state of mind that you're in when you eat. You need to pay attention to the state of mind that you're in when you choose your food. You need to pay attention to the state of your mind when you're preparing your food. So we're going to talk about preparing our food and the importance of sitting, enjoying the preparation, making meal times a fun event, not just this rushed, on-the-go, convenient thing. Eating mustn't be that anymore. Eating must be an enjoyable event, something you look forward to, something you spend time preparing, something that becomes a very healthy part of development for your mind as well. So it's a different way of looking at food. I'm not going to tell you to eat one particular diet. In fact, there's so many diets out there that if you think that you're coming on this discussion to think, okay, let's see what diet she recommends, the only diet I'm going to recommend is that you eat real food mindfully. Okay, so there's so many fads out there. I mean, it's actually pretty confusing, and I say that at the beginning of my book. Like, where do you start? One day you must eat this oil, next day you mustn't eat that oil. One day this is great and high fat, low carb, whatever. There's always some other suggestion or some other food that you must eat and one that you mustn't eat. And you see these ads on internet about if you eat these foods, it's going to affect your gut, and it's so confusing. Food eating is becoming more and more and more confusing when it actually should be very, very simple. So I hope that through teaching you this information, your eating process will become simple. I really encourage you, if you haven't already got the book, get the book. It is on special at the moment. There's also an online program, like an online course that goes with the book that you could do. And I suggest you get a few families together, get some friends together and do this together. Do these weekly YouTube lives together and start applying these principles together. You'll see the online version actually has like a group study to it. So it walks you through 63 days to think and eat yourself smart. So you can, and the online refers back to sections of the book. So you can use the online, you can use the book. There's also a workbook and a DVD. There's also not a DVD, there's a workbook and DVD coming out. But at the moment, we've got the book and the online program, and they work so well together. So I encourage you to get those to help you through the process. Okay, so let's begin, and I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to read through certain sections and then talk about certain sections. Today, we're talking about chapters 1 through 4. So I'm just going to get to chapters 1 through 4. Just a quick word about the structure of the book. You'll see when you look at the contents that I've divided the book up into admit it, quit it, and beat it. 3 sections: admit, quit, beat. And the first section, admit, is to admit that there's something wrong with our current food system, to increase your knowledge and your awareness of what is wrong with the current food system and how important that is and how that affects us. So I'm giving you knowledge. It's very empowering knowledge-wise, and some of the information I share in these chapters is quite shocking. You will notice that this book has an extensive reference list. It literally is like this thick. I'm going to get to there. It literally is all that references. And those references, there's YouTube videos. There are so many great links on there for you to dive deeper and dig deeper with all the concepts that I'm teaching you. As you'll also find at the back of the book that I've got some of my favorite family recipes, the recipes that we love to use as a family. So, and they are all created by our family, for our family, but anyone obviously can use them, and they're very nutritionally dense and really fantastic. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you to eat a vegan diet or to eat keto or to eat vegetarian or to say this diet's better than that diet. That's not what I'm here to tell you. I'm here to tell you that you need to learn to eat real food mindfully. Okay, so and then first part of the book is admit it, increasing your knowledge of the current food system. The second part of the book is I call Quit It, and there I talk a lot about the impact of the mind on how our brain functions and on how our body functions in terms of eating. So, for example, things like how you can subconsciously build into your networks of your mind and your brain when you're constantly looking at the different food ads. So if you constantly even if you're not even directly paying attention, you drive the kids to school. When my kids were still at school and we drive them to school, we would pass there were 29 takeouts from between our house and the school. Not one of them was healthy. Now you're driving past those every single day. So you're seeing that every single day, in addition to hearing those on TV, social media. So you have to be aware that those constant repetition of looking at that information on the billboards and on that where you see the adverts and driving past these quick food takeout places, you are seeing it so much that you are building a memory of it into your brain. So when you get hungry, what pops into your mind is what you paid attention to the most. Remember, whatever you're thinking about the most will grow. And if you're hungry, and if you haven't controlled how your mind should work while you're eating, well, then you're just going to grab the most convenient thing. And we live in this convenience, quick, fast way of eating, and that's not a good thing. So I talk a lot about that in the Quit It section. I talk about the impact of how high fructose corn syrup and the bad sugars impact your brain, how the bad fats impact your brain, how we need good fat. The truth about things like what fats do for your brain and how important they are. And I talk about protein. I talk about the TV, watching TV, what it does to your brain. Loads of mind stuff there. So we'll get into some addictions, food disorders. That all comes in the second section. In the third section called Beat It, there I talk about how basically 12 steps to help you beat it. So 12 steps to help you transforming your way of thinking and eating and making it a new lifestyle. You've heard me say so often, change doesn't occur overnight. We all know that. Same thing with your eating. it's going to take a little bit of time for you to change your mindset, to change your pantry, to change your shopping habits, to change your cooking habits, to change the way you eat, all those kinds of things. But in this third section, I give you 12 steps to beat it, 12 steps to help you in this endeavor of transforming your lifestyle. Okay, so it's very cognitive. I also talk a lot about our role as stewards of creation. We love to talk about the fact that we must be stewards of creation. Well, part of creation is your physical brain and body. So if you're feeding your physical brain and body junk food, you're not stewarding your physical brain and body. If you are eating junk food, have you ever considered the impact of how that junk food was produced and the impact on the land and on the animals? It's actually destroying the animals and the land. It's inhumane to the animals, and you'll see that as we discuss this in this book, and it's causing damage to the land. So by partaking of the incorrect way of eating, by eating junk food, processed food, what we call the modern American diet, very aptly named the MAD diet, we are not being stewards of creation. Okay, and it's not a situation of I'll just eat junk food and say grace and it'll turn into something healthy. That God is not a genie. It doesn't work like that. So we need to be responsible. We need to be responsible. We're intelligent, thinking human beings. We love our bodies. We love the earth. We love our kids. We love our family. So let's put that into practice when it comes to dealing with our brain and our body. Yes, you are predominantly mind, but your mind has to work through your brain and your mind has to work through your body. So if you don't look after your brain and your body, then the information can't get into your brain and body properly. And if your brain and your body are busy dysfunctioning, they could be dying. Things could be going wrong in your brain and body. And then that feeds back into your mind and you set up a negative feedback loop. So eating in a healthy way is not some weird fundamentalist, crazy, extreme thing that you can't do. It is a lifestyle issue, and people are dying from preventable lifestyle diseases. And the diseases that people are getting from eating incorrectly are killing people. These are preventable things. Getting your mind under control is something you control. Getting your mind under control when it comes to what you choose to eat, how you cook, and how you actually eat is incredible. It's under your control. You have incredible power. My husband and I, Matt, we travel extensively with the work that we do, and many places we go to, we really battle to find decent eating choices. So we always travel with organic things. We always travel with some organic kale and nuts and whatever we can find, certain bars. And if we can't find any decent healthy food, that's what we'll eat. We always go and look for the local farm-to-table restaurants and the Whole Foods, and we'll purchase the food. We do not get sucked into eating junk food. We never do. We don't touch it. And if there isn't anything around and we've used up our food, or we just fast. Fasting is good for you. It's incredibly good for your brain. In fact, the older you get, the more caloric restriction you should have. You should eat less and less and less as you get older. And we eat way too much anyway, so smaller portions is very important. So fasting and eating less is really good for you. Another thing that you'll see I talk about often is the fact that we need to be very careful that we don't eat on the run. Really bad to eat on the run. We need to be very conscious and deliberate and intentional about not just grabbing food and eating without thinking. You need to be very involved with how you are eating. So when we're in a rush, we don't eat. We eat when we're calm and peaceful. If I'm worked up or in a rush, I don't touch food. I eat food when I'm calm and peaceful, and because that's how my digestive system is going to function more efficiently and how I will get the most out of my nutrition. Okay, so that's a brief walk through everything. So now let's dive in to chapter 1. Chapter 1 on page, I'm not going to go through the prologue, I'm going to go straight to chapter 1. Page 21, Real Food and the Mad Way of Eating. The prologue is pretty much what I've just covered in the last 5 minutes or so. Okay, so page 21, Real Food and the Mad Way of Eating. So today the McDonald's logo is more recognizable than the Christian cross. And just as the cross represents Christianity, the McDonald's M can be seen as the image of what has come to be known as the Western diet, appropriately referred to by its acronym MAD, MAD, the modern American diet. Quite an eye-opener. Okay, so in the first section, I talk about the diversity of diet. I talk about how diversity is the norm. Now, just think of this principle. You're not the same as anyone else. Your fingerprint's not the same as anyone else. We've done the perfect you in January, and we've spoken about how unique we are, and that there's no normal brain, and the law of the brain is diversity. And we know from the scriptures that we are uniquely, fearfully, and wonderfully made. The law of humanity and nature is diversity. So diversity means different foodstuffs, different types of foodstuffs, different types of diets. So depending on where you live in the world, there's different types of food that are locally grown, and this diversity is very normal. Diversity in all kinds of types of foods is the normal thing. Now, it is so normal that that's how we should be eating. But with the industrialized food movement, which is part of the modern American diet, which is part of the westernized way of eating, diversity has been overlooked. It has been minimized at the expense of our health. So let's have a look at what I mean by that. So I say a little bit in this first paragraph about how throughout human history, human beings have survived and thrived on a diversity of diets. So there isn't one way of eating, and there's a diverse ways of the diverse different food products. And then I give a couple of examples of different food products. Now, human beings are also able to adapt, page 22, to different ways of eating over time. Okay, so a consistent theme, and I'm jumping to the third paragraph on this page, a consistent theme across dietary research is that there is no one way of eating. So that's one of the first points that I stress in this book. There is no one way of eating. We are diverse as humans. We need to recognize that. And I say that because how many times have you and I seen something either on TV or on a billboard or on a book that this is the way of eating. This is the only way of eating. You know, you'll see this, some kind of a diet, and it's considered to be the only way of eating. And it becomes a huge trend, and it probably is a great way of eating, but it's certainly not the only way of eating. And in any case, in any of those diets, vegan, vegetarian, keto, whatever it may be, if it's junk food that you're using within that diet, that's bad for you. So whatever diet you do choose amongst the diversity of ways that we can eat, it's very important that you always remember to make sure that it's real food and you're eating it mindfully. So if you're doing keto, make sure it's real food and you're eating it mindfully. If you're doing the blood type diet, make sure it's real food and you're eating it mindfully. If you're doing vegetarian, real food mindfully, and so on. We're going to define real food very soon. Okay, so the next thing is that I go to page 23, and I'm going to talk now about what is real food. Okay, so the one thing that is common across cultures and across time when it comes to dietary research is that different cultures, what has been discussed, a common theme is that they eat real food. Okay, this may sound very obvious at first. What is real food? What else can we eat beside real food? Unfortunately, this is where the modern American diet is unique. I'm reading from page 23 under the heading, Real Food is Wired for Love. Okay, despite the apparent diversity of foodstuffs in our grocery stores, restaurants, and homes, many of the products available for purchase today are industrially manufactured food-like products. Okay, so as journalist and activist Michael Pollan calls them, they contain unfamiliar they contain unfamiliar substances that extend shelf life and flavor. Now there's a key thing. Unfamiliar substances that aren't real food that do one of two things. They extend shelf life, which means they live longer. You can stick them on your shelf in your pantry and they last for days. And they extend flavor. So those are not real things that should be happening to food. The food has been meddled with and fiddled with. Okay, and they are also often these ones where their shelf life has been extended, and a lot of flavors been added. They are often derived from three highly processed commodities: corn, soy, and wheat, unfortunately. So as Michael Pollan says, these are food-like products, and food-like products will eventually cause disease in our body. And we're seeing this trend now. The food-like products have been around. The industrialized food movement producing food-like products has been around for about 50 years. And we're seeing now, 50 years later, that people are dying very much younger than they should be, 15 to 25 years younger, from preventable lifestyle diseases. And part of this lifestyle thing is the food that we are eating. Okay, so it's coming, the seed you sow will produce, and the seeds of eating wrong food and the industrialized food movement is producing fruit, and the fruit is not good. People are dying, getting very ill, all kinds of weird diseases and so on. And I discussed that extensively in this book. So what is real food? Page 23, middle paragraph. Real food is food grown the way God intended. What is that? Fresh and nutritious, predominantly local, which means grown in that area, seasonal, grass-fed, as wild as possible, free of synthetic chemicals, whole or minimally processed, and ecologically diverse. There's that word diverse again, lots of different types of food. Okay, it's grown according to God's multifaceted genius, transfused through interconnected ecosystems because God created our ecosystems. Okay, so there's one consistent, I'm continuing to read. If there's one consistent theme across the research I have done for this book, and it's years of research that has gone into this book, it is that our food systems are wired for love. You've heard me say that so often, that we are wired for love. Well, our food systems are wired for love as well, which means our food systems are structured and designed to bring health to our bodies when we look after the land and look after the foods that we are growing for our bodies. Okay? And the modern American diet completely goes against that. The industrialized food movement goes against all those principles. Okay, so that is when we care about the way our food is produced, and this requires responsibility. I'm talking about taking responsibility for the way food is produced and the way you're making food choices. When you care about the way food is produced, grown, the animals, etc., and you care about what the animals we eat, then we consume foods that are most nourishing for us. For instance, humans, like many other species, are most attracted to fruits when they are fresh, ripe, and succulent, which also happens to be when they are at their most nutritious. So when they do, what they do currently is when they pick fruits and vegetables too soon, before they are ripe and they're still green, they then spray them with chemicals to preserve them. They then spray them with more chemicals to bring color into them. They then package them, and then they transport them all over the country. So by the time they land on the shelves fresh, they're already probably 2 weeks old, and the color has not come from it naturally happening on the tree, on the bush, etc. It has come from chemical sprays. That is not healthy at all. That is not real food at all. That's the complete opposite of real food. Similarly, animals that have been treated humanely and allowed to roam in ecologically rich environments are more nutritious for us to consume, with a higher omega-3 fatty acid content, not to mention one of the there's many benefits. Seasonal, natural, and local are not just trendy bywords. These words actually indicate food choices based on a growing body of scientific evidence of the benefits of locally produced foods growing in strong, diverse ecosystems and eaten as fresh as possible in a world where not everyone is a farmer. Indeed, many of the best chefs in restaurants source local food because they not only are nutritionally more dense, but they taste better. Okay, so then moving into the next section in chapter 1 is I talk about organic versus conventional. So there's a whole section, and I'm just going to talk about it briefly because you can dive into it. There's lots of information. As I said, the online program really breaks this down into small little sections, and it takes you through little things to do and exercises to help you practice this daily. So to understand what real food means, we do need to examine the difference between organic versus conventional. So let's have a look at how I define it. So page 24, the heading organic versus conventional agriculture. Okay, so I'm just going to swap this out. My hand's getting sore. Okay, so to understand what real food means, we need to examine a hot topic, organic agriculture. The terms organic and conventional are controversial and do have many interpretations. Essentially, a great definition for organic means organic farming is mainly based on biology or using living organisms rather than synthetic chemicals, while conventional farming is mainly based on chemistry using synthetic substances such as pesticides and growth hormones. So if you are eating conventional versus organic, you are eating things that are grown naturally versus things that are grown with chemicals and synthetic hormones. And whatever is they are grown with are inside of them. So they're going inside of you. And this is what research is showing, is that what we are consuming, whatever we are consuming, and whatever we are consuming is they basically going into whatever that we are consuming has got stuff on them, the chemicals, we are consuming that too. It's affecting us as well, to going into your body. And we're seeing it causing all kinds of problems: heart, liver diseases, fatty liver disease, asthma problems, problems with thinking, learning, concentration, obesity, things that are life-threatening. Not just little things that are life-threatening. And it's a cumulative effect. If you eat it now and then, it's not as bad as if you eat it constantly. A little bit every day is cumulative. And eventually it's going to start breaking down your brain and your body. So it's not a matter of just, oh, well, I'll just, doesn't really matter, I'll just sort of eat it or whatever. You need to be deliberate and intentional, because there is a cumulative effect in your body. Okay, so over the past several decades, conventional agriculture has unfortunately come to dominate global food production. So the westernized modern American diet, this industrialized food produced movement over the last 50 years has come to dominate over organic farming, and has increased yields of food, and with lower prices, but at the cost of quality and at the cost of health. So what we might think we're saving on one side, are we really saving when you look at the costs of health, the shortened lifespans, the awful lifespans when you have to live with disease, and then what it's doing to our land, etc. So that is not stewardship. It's really not stewardship that the Bible talks about. Okay, so organic farming, because it really uses chemicals, has to adapt to the local environment. And this adaptation promotes biodiversity, which means lots of different things, through smaller and more varied and more quality yields. Organic farms are therefore generally considered more ecologically sustainable, which is a good thing, and they use about 30% less energy than conventional agriculture and are less toxic to living organisms. So they're much healthier. So synthetic chemicals, on the other hand, used on conventional farms, so synthetic, conventional, those are the bad. Organic, biological, agroecological, good, okay? Yet they are examined, yet when you look, the chemicals are tested in laboratories, but if you look at how they're examined, it's actually kind of scary, because they tested on animals, number one, which is also not a good thing, and because there's no guarantee also that, besides it being cruel, there's no guarantee that the impact on animals is going to be the same as on humans. The other thing is that they look at very minute amounts. They don't look at the impact in and they look at it in laboratory control conditions, not in the reality of the complexity of life. So they don't really know the impact on ecosystems and on the soil. We only understand about 2% of the soil. So we don't really know what those synthetic chemicals are really doing to the soil and to the environment. And the cumulative effect of these artificial substances has not been sufficiently studied. So with lots and lots of different types of chemicals and pesticides in the environment, maybe one on its own in minute amounts in a laboratory condition in an animal may not impact, but what about large amounts over time, cumulatively, and all different kinds in humans and in the ecosystem? We don't know what that's doing. So therefore it's not safe. We don't know what it's doing, except we do know 50 years later that that the obesity epidemic and fatty liver disease and all these illnesses are increasing. Okay, so as biologist and Berkeley professor Dr. Tyrone Hayes, I'm reading from page 25, notes, it's a little like your doctor giving you potentially harmful pills without asking you what other medication you are taking. You always have to look at, when you take medication, what other stuff you are taking, because sometimes the interaction between medication can be lethal for your body. And what you do in medicine, they're not doing with food. And you've got to eat food to survive. Okay, so there I talk a lot about these things on this page 25. I just want to talk on page 26 about the industrial. If you look at page 26, I have a heading, the organic industrial complex. Now, when we start to talk about large-scale operations, some of the benefits of organic farming that I've already briefly spoken about become a little clouded. So as Colin, who's that author I mentioned earlier on, points out, we need to be very careful of the mass transportation of organic products across states and the mass production. Does quality suffer when there's a mass production? The biggest thing with organic farming is not mass production. As soon as we have mass production, we lose out on a lot of the value of what comes from farming, what we call agroecologically. So I explained that there. And since the founding ideals of the organic movement is on the restoration of the relationship between you and I, the consumer, and the producer, the farmer, thereby restoring trust and mutual obligation in the arena of food production, in other words, stewardship of your body and the land that you're doing together. Then the rise of organic industry is a little confusing because how can you know where your food is farmed, etc. So it's really good idea before you just buy something. Look, if it says organic, just check out the farm, check out the farming methods, because sometimes they say the animals are organically raised, with organic feed, and that it was that they were farm raised, pasture raised. But they only spent maybe, it's a tiny little area, and they only maybe spent the last week of their life on grass, and only fed for part of their life on organic corn only, instead of being able to roam the fields and eat the herbs and the grasses. That's organic pasture raised, when they, from birth to the time that they are slaughtered, that they are actually wild, wandering around the fields, eating, plowing in the land, etc., etc. So there's a difference there. So it's always a good idea to look at the farm and find out details about what do they mean by pasture raised. Is it for the last 3 weeks of their life, or is it for the whole lifespan of that animal? Okay, then I go on to talking about real food and the supermarket, the modern supermarket, because rising with the industrialized food movement came the giant supermarkets. And now that we have the definition of real food and some idea of the difference between conventional and organic agriculture, we can take a look at our local supermarket and assess how real food is actually sold there. So if you start with the organic foods, organic has taken on an almost religious significance with consumers, but there is a little subtle trap, because organic foods can be refined and processed. So when you see organic TV dinner, so it's very processed, it's lost a lot of its value, because real food is minimally processed. So there might be, also it says organic, but if you look at the ingredients, there's 50 or 60 ingredients, and only maybe 10% are starred, and the star is the organic. And then there's stuff that you don't even recognize, and then you'll see that it's really heavily processed food. So you need to be very aware. That's why you must take the whole definition of real food into consideration when you're purchasing. This is where the app's great, because I really walk you through how to do it. And then in this book, you just got to learn this stuff. And remember what I always say, build your brain. As you study this stuff, you are learning new information. Not only are you learning how to eat properly, but you're also building your brain. You're getting more intelligent. Okay, so that's really good. Okay, so it's great to I give an example about let's say that there is, we all have kiwi fruits, and let's say organically farmed kiwi fruit from New Zealand is perfectly organically farmed. They're doing all the right thing, but now it's packaged and sent to United States of America. It's lost a lot of its nutritional value in that. So be very careful of imported foods as a consistent thing. So just because it says organic, if it's imported, it's definitely lost a portion of its nutrition. So there's lots of little points that I make about organic to educate yourself, that you don't just think, oh, organic, I can just buy it, but that you look a little bit deeper. Bring in the farm to table, locally sourced. Also, to become organically registered is very, very, very expensive. And a lot of local farmers can't afford that. So it's really good to become familiar with your local farmers in your area. And one thing that we do as a family is we buy from Consumer Supported Agriculture, CSAs. And that's from the local farms in the area that we live. So we're getting locally produced food, which is then the nutrition we need for this kind of climate. And it's been a lot of diversity. So we never quite know what vegetables and fruits we're going to get and what they're going to look like, because it's very diverse and it's very agroecologically grown. Same thing with the meats and the chicken and eggs and things. It's always different all the time. And that is good. That is healthy. That means you're getting nutritious food. Now, they might not necessarily say organic, but if you know the farm and you know they're not using the chemical pesticides and you know how they farm the food, then you know it's safe. And the CSAs are very, very strict with that. So I've actually got information in this book about CSAs, consumer supported agriculture. So you can find out about those in your area, find out the closest one and how it works. There's different ways that they do them. We pick up our products from a local area that's very close. You can pick it up twice a week, once a week. You can work out what works for you, and you just select what you want. And you get to know your farmers and the farms. You can go to their farmers markets. There's some great options. There's another. We live in we found a lot of areas, local farms in the area where we spend a lot of our time, which is in Dallas, where our head office is, and we found a farm called Bonton Farms, and they do locally produced food, and they have farmers markets. There's actually so many. You will be amazed. Wherever Mac and I go, we always find so many local farms. It's becoming such a strong thing now. There's such an increased awareness that it's so much easier now than it was maybe just 5 years ago, 3 years ago, to find this kind of food. It just takes a little bit of effort on your behalf to find this food. Okay, so that's enough with the organic. You can read more about that on your own. I basically go on to, I talk a little bit more in this particular section about being aware of the supermarket. Remember, the fresh foods on the outside, and avoid the middle aisles, down the middle parts, because that's where the things in boxes are. Things at eye level are generally the worst for you. Things that you have to bend down to are normally the healthier ones. Things at the checkout counter are normally your most unhealthy. So I give you all the rules of supermarkets in here, and I really lay it out in a very simple way in section 3, so that when you go into a supermarket, that you shop with your mind. Don't just walk in and grab what you're familiar with. Learn about where things are placed. It's all very planned and strategically planned to get you to buy lots of junk food. You buy lots of junk food, you're voting with your fork, literally. You're then supporting the industrialized food complex. If we stop buying that stuff, and that's a comment that I make further on in chapter 4, that you vote with your fork. In other words, you vote with your fork, you vote with your money. So what you are spending your money on is what they're going to keep producing. So if you stop buying the junk food, and if all of us stop buying the junk food, then you're going to have more of these supermarkets bringing in the organic CSA type food, the consumer supported agriculture. So the farmers are going to be able to get their food into the supermarkets instead of the huge, big industrialized farms. So that's a very important thing. Okay, so we need to just I just want to make a note, one more note about this, the modern American diet in terms of supermarkets and so on. Page 28, in the middle of the page, I talk about the snare of long life foods. Are they really good? Not at all. They can directly affect your health. So, for example, take the average loaf of bread. I just want to read this paragraph to you because it's such an eye-opener, and it really summarizes the modern American diet. To take the average loaf of bread, to adapt the production of bread to the food industry's goal of a large market for cheap and efficiently produced foodstuffs that last for a long time, the wheat germ, which contains the natural oils that give bread its true wholesome flavor and make it nutritious, has to be removed. So the wheat germ, which is the good stuff, has to be removed in order to fulfill the goal of the modern American diet, which is long-term, efficient, long shelf life, etc. Because if you keep it, that wheat germ causes the bread to rot within a day. Interesting. So the good stuff means that you're only supposed to eat that bread for a short period of time. It's going to be rotten within a day. But most bread you can buy, and you can keep it in your pantry for weeks, sometimes even months, and it's still fresh. But is it really fresh? What are you eating? You're not eating food. You're eating food-like products that are damaging your brain and every cell of your body and feeding back into your mind and impacting how you're thinking. Now, that is not a good choice. How many times have you heard me talk about choice and the importance of choices? And that applies to your food choices, because your food choices are feeding the brain and the body that your mind has to work through. This is part of being a responsible steward of creation. Okay, so let's move over to, the last section of this chapter. I want to move over to the next chapter. Talks about a better approach. Let's go agroecological. And agroecological is the concept of buying from your local farmers that I've already mentioned. So you can read that in there. I talk about the CSAs, etc. So let's now have a look at chapter 2, page 33, the trouble with mass production. So a big thing about the Western modern American diet, the industrialized food movement that began about 40 years ago, is its mass production, lots and lots and lots and lots. Okay, so I start this chapter by saying something very important. God created a natural world that is characterized by incredible diversity, a point I made right at the beginning as well. And you can see this in Genesis 1. This ecological variety, this diversity, this ecological variety helps to prevent disease. Okay, so the very diversity that is naturally in nature prevents disease. So eating like from your local farm was a very diverse diet, local, all the real food, the definition I gave you, is disease preventative. Okay, so what God has given us is disease preventative. So this ecological variety helps to prevent disease through the special functions of the food, or what I like to call the I factors unique to each species within the ecosystem. Just as each of us is uniquely made in the image of God with a specific love-based purpose and plan. From the thousands of species of bees, for example, that pollinate our world, to the millions of tiny microorganisms that enrich our soils, the world is wired for love and life. Research shows that agroecological approaches, which is the approach that is diverse, which is the approach that we see coming through very clearly in the Bible, is one that brings life and not death. The westernized, industrialized food movement is not doing that. It has the opposite characteristics or objectives. In contrast to this rich diversity within each ecosystem, imagine an ecosystem in which a single species of plant dominates. So we have diversity, that's the norm. Now imagine a situation where there's only one type of flower or one type of species. You know instinctively that that would not lead to survival. But that's what we're doing with the industrialized food movement. We're wrecking this diversity concept and we're focusing on getting single. We're going from diverse to single, from diversity to monoculture, it's called. Okay, so this is what happens on massive farms today. You know those ones where you picture the wheat or the corn, one species, as far as the eye can see in every direction. If you can just see one type of species, you're looking at mono, meaning one culture. Diversity has been removed and man has interfered and turned this into mass production. Okay, and you will see as we go through the book, this is not solving the world's food crisis. It's increasing the world's food crisis because it's damaging the land and it's creating all kinds of other effects in our climate and our economy, etc., and humanity, etc. So it's had a very, very negative effect. Okay, so then this is called monoculture, which means the mass production of a single crop. Food monocultures, I'm reading on page 33 at the bottom. Food monocultures such as corn, soy, and wheat, which are the three most common monocultures, and the factory farming of animals. Animals are not meant to be in a factory. Animals are meant to roam wildly and together because when they walk through the ground, their hooves they turn up the ground, and then they waste products fertilize the ground, and they're eating the herbs, and all the animals moving amongst each other creates a very healthy land. So when we take that away, we damage the land. So factory farming animals is causing a huge problems. So food monocultures such as corn, soy, and wheat, and the factory farming of animals both focus on the mass production of a single species and are removing the delicate ecological balance found in diversity as promoted or as presented in Genesis 1. In 1904, for example, there were over 7,000 varieties of apples grown in the United States. Today, we have lost roughly 86% of those varieties. 86% of the over 7,000 varieties of apples grown in the United States between 1904 and now, 2019, 86% have been lost through monoculture. So what God has given, man has destroyed. That's essentially what's happening. So we have freedom to choose, and we've chosen wrong. There are consequences. So now we need to choose right. We need to reintroduce diversity. The consequences of a monoculture style food system are the necessary, when you have monoculture, listen to this sentence. The consequences, remember, with choice comes consequence. I lay before you life and death, blessing and cursing, choose life, so that you and your descendants may live. There are consequences of choices. So the consequences of a monoculture style food system are the necessary use of artificial substances such as pesticides to merely keep crops alive. the loss of diversity and thereby health and the destruction of our planet. So what does that mean? Monoculture has messed up the land. So now there's all these weird insects and masses of them. Everything's been upset. So now they have to use lots and lots and lots of chemical pesticides just to try to keep the monoculture alive. And that makes even more of a problem in the land, the soil, the environment, the atmosphere, etc. And we've got this boomerang effect which goes across the world. It doesn't just stay here. You've heard of the butterfly effect. What happens here affects the whole world. So we need to be very aware of that. Indeed, the majority of us today, look at that next paragraph, consume foods that are essentially coming from plants kept alive on an IV of synthetic substances. That's an eye-opener. These plants survive our manipulation on the natural diversity found in nature, but they do not thrive in such conditions. And with the alarming loss of 75% of our natural agricultural diversity, seed banks have been set up across the globe to urgently save as many varieties of produce and grains as possible. So because of man making really wrong choices with their mind, not being responsible, thinking they can fiddle with the food environment, we now have a major problem where 75% of the diversity of our natural agricultural crops, fruits and vegetables, etc., wheat, etc., have been lost. So food seed banks that are actually growing seeds for future in case because we've lost up to 75% of the diversity God has given us. We need food banks now to actually grow the seeds. So these are very real consequences of bad choices. I talk all the time about thinking, feeling, choosing, making good choices. You are now seeing a clear example of making bad choices in terms of food, in terms of environment, in terms of brain body health, in terms of us as humanity, in terms of animals, in terms of being a steward. All of this is linked. So even though we're talking about food, we are talking about the things that I've been talking all the time. We happen to be focusing on food and the importance of being stewards of the food that we consume. So is this a healthy situation? What happens if the crop of that one particular species is infected with some kind of fungus? So you've got one crop and now you get a fungus that rampantly goes through all the corn, soy, and wheat. What are you going to do? You don't have food because there's no diversity. With diversity comes strength. With diversity comes the ability to fight those things. You can plant certain flowers in certain crops and that keeps the insects under control so that they don't kill the crops. There's so many amazing things that can happen when we think clearly in terms of making good decisions about food. For example, I'm sure you've probably heard of the mid-19th century Irish potato famine. Although it happened at a different time in history, with its own unique origins and results, we can still see it as a warning for what can happen today. All of Ireland was crippled because it put its faith in a variety of one crop of potato, the lumper potato. And when these potatoes were infected with the fungus, an unknown strain and I can't even pronounce this, Phytophthora infestans, they turned them into a revolting mush. Around 1 million people starved to death, while countless others were compelled to leave their homeland. With our continued reliance on monocultures such as corn, soy, and wheat, there is a very real danger that our global food production is at risk of failing in a similar manner. Okay, so then I go on to talk about why have corn and soy become our golden crops and become so dominant in our cultures today. And this is on page 34 at the bottom. Although the changes in the American agriculture over the past decades are manifold and complex, there was a big turning point in 1933 with what we call the Farm Bill, which was a response to the need for an adequate food supply during the Great Depression. So massive change happened around 1933 after the food depression when there was a need for an adequate food supply. And they introduced what they called the Farm Bill of 1933. And it was a great and admirable goal. Millions of Americans were starving, and the individuals behind this bill were passionately driven to help them get food. However, the same bill, which is reintroduced every 5 years, continues to promote large-scale government subsidization. So what did this bill do? It promoted large-scale government subsidization. So it gave gave farmers money to grow crops. And it was done for the right reasons and in the right way back then, but it's become distorted over the years. So farmers are given subsidies to grow corn, soy, and wheat. So they grow diversity, they don't get subsidies. So they have a financial crisis amongst the farmers where they're forced to grow because of the subsidy situation. So it's messed up. The situation a lot. And I go on to join there. I talk a little bit about the political situation and how that's how it's affected lobbying, and how the US government brought in the concept of get big or get out, which was the US Secretary of Agriculture at that time said get big in terms of farming or get out of farming. And so people were losing their farms. The only way they could survive was to join the system and to go against all their natural ways that they were used to farming, etc. And then on page 36, I talk great yields at great cost, mass animal production. I'm sure that you've driven through different parts of the country and you've seen animals that look so unhappy, standing in the hot sun on in a little area in sand, or actually locked up in these awful pens. These are called concentrated animal farming operations. I have some videos that I links to videos that I suggest that you watch. You can just go online. Netflix has a lot of them, and I suggest you watch some of them. See how the animals that are producing the masses of different meat products that you can buy in the stores today are where they are coming from. And always remember that what the animal eats, you eat. And these animals are in abhorrent, inhumane conditions for the most, where they are standing in their feces, they have infections in their body. 80% of the United States antibiotics are being fed to these poor animals. They are in abusive conditions. They are not eating normal food. They're being force-fed corn and soy, that is GMO corn and soy, and we will be talking in other sessions about GMO. They are filled with GMO products, corn and soy. They are filled with antibiotics. They are very unhappy, very, very frightened. And there's a lot of research done, and I put references in the book on how they feel the emotions and how they're frightened, and that affects their cortisol levels and the whole hormone system, which is then in the meat that you eat. So your hormones, not only are you getting synthetic hormones, but you are getting abnormal stress, toxic hormones in your body from eating that food. I mean, there is a multiplicity of consequences besides the fact that it is not being a steward to treat an animal badly. They even get fed in these mass feedlots. They get fed other animals that are dead, and so they're forcing a cow to eat a cow or cows to eat chickens. They put sweets and cakes and junk food in there to fill up the feed. So these animals are getting a lot of food that they can't digest. And often in certain cases where the cows choke on the food because they're not being allowed enough time to ruminate on the food, they will shove pipes down their throat in a very inhumane way to get the food down. I mean, it's terrible. They cut the tails of the pigs off because pigs are so unhappy and so frightened that they chew their own pigs off and their tails off. They cut the beaks of the chickens and the ducks, etc., so that they don't pick at each other. Their legs break. They're often just lying in a mess of feces, etc. So this is terrible stuff. So I want you to become aware of it. I know that probably made you feel a bit ill, but that's a good thing, because you need to be a steward of creation. That's not a steward of being a steward of creation. And not only are the animals affected, but there's a lot of trafficking. There's a lot of immigrant labor that is abused. There's a lot of bad stuff going on these farms that are not healthy situations. So besides the fact that the land and our bodies are being affected and we're not stewarding, humans are suffering. There's human trafficking where these girls are trafficked and they basically used in the labor situation, and there's mass unpaid and very low wages being paid, and I talk about that here as well. Okay, so we have to look at what is the real price tag. When you buy cheap food, what are you really buying? So that's really what I cover a lot of in that chapter. Now let's talk in chapter 3. I've mentioned this already a few times. We're talking about the mad diseases. And for the balance of chapter 3, I'm talking a lot about the impact of the different diseases that we get from eating this in this bad way. So the mad, as I said, is aptly named since it is refined in high. It is high in refined sugar, salt, and saturated fats. I'm reading on page 41, which are added to make the processed foods edible and attractive. So it's refined sugar, which is, we're going to talk at later stages what that looks like, and salt and saturated fats, heated fats. The processed foods in the modern American diet are filled with those that confuse your brain and create what we call bliss points in your brain, where your ability of your hormone system to read what your body needs and for your brain to think through whether you are hungry or not hungry are overridden. The food is specifically designed to actually damage your hormone system and damage your brain so that you don't know when you're full, so you eat more and more and more. So these are a few things that we will be discussing. A diet high in these added sugars correlates with a greater risk of obesity, dementia, stroke, cancer, tooth decay, insulin resistance, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, too many of these heavy triglycerides and oxidized LDL cholesterol. The list can go on and on and on. So I'm going to discuss this in more depth when we get to the sugar chapter. Excessive consumption of the high amounts of sodium in processed salty foods can lead to high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, kidney damage, cancer, weight gain, osteoporosis, and overeating. This list is long and alarming. I just have touched on a few things. So processed, heated, and refined fats, trans fats, which are hydrogenated fats, are the bad fats commonly found in foods such as margarine, shortening, your average American pizza, processed cheese, so widely available. And these bad fats have been linked to high risk of heart disease, macular degeneration in your eyes, multiple sclerosis, certain cancers, diabetes, obesity, and you can see this is scary stuff. So when I say that people are dying from preventable lifestyle diseases, and I said that earlier on, we see a lot of detail in this chapter about this. And we also have to look, in fact, in schools. I just want to quickly focus a little bit on page 42, with 1/3 of American vegetable consumption consisting of French fries and iceberg lettuce and potato chips. The US Congress has classified pizza as a vegetable, and these diet-related diseases are a daily reality for millions of people. Now listen to this. The average American consumes around 130 pounds of sugar per year, 53 gallons of soft drinks, sodas, 50 million Americans eat at fast food restaurants daily, and a mere 10% of grocery purchases are fresh vegetables and fruits. I mean, this is terrible. The American School Nutrition Association, which is heavily funded by food corporations and claims that they're trying to better serve the nation's children, published a very disturbing position paper. And they said, in order to prevent waste, fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and low sodium options are no longer required with every school meal. While junk food is a part of the reimbursable food system. So in other words, you can get money back if you give them junk food, and as an alternative for alternative school meals. As a mother of 4 children, I'm shocked at this. I'm shocked and horrified at what they're feeding children. I've worked in schools in this country. I've walked around. I've smelt the food. It doesn't even smell like food. And these kids are being fed plates of junk food, and they're supposed to concentrate and learn. So we need to look at that. I talk about obesity. I talk about the whole next section. I talk about the increase in obesity and how by 2025, the WHO, World Health Organization, have called for a 2025 goal to end the rising epidemic of weight gain. I have doctors that work with me and some of the endocrinologists and OBGYNs that work with me, so that babies are being born obese. And we'll also talk, you'll see in this series, about how what we eat affects our children, what our grandparents ate, back to 4 generations affects our children. So there's a lot of responsibility. So then that the rest of the chapter talks about that. And then the last chapter we're going to just very briefly cover today is the mad truth about the mad. Okay, the mad, and I basically summarize in this chapter that the concept that the mad is so dangerous for our health, which you've already heard me say, and the health of our planet. Why do we continue to eat this way? So in this chapter, I address why are we doing this if it's so bad for ourselves? And a lot of it's come from convenience. And it's just convenience and quick when you're rushing between sports, but events with your kids, when you've got to collect them from school and go here, it's easy just to drive into a takeaway. Everyone's busy working, doing homework. You just grab, eat in front of the TV. It's just rush, rush, rush. So it's what we've done, and I actually indicate this over here. We have this mealtime expediency, trying to rush our meal times, has created a whole new mental mindset around food. Food must be convenient, and it shouldn't be convenient. Food should be something that should be enjoyed, I said in the beginning. So this mealtime expediency, speeding up eating, has allowed many of us to advance other aspects of our lives. But as sustainable food activist Hesterman of the Food Fair Network explains, by placing food production in the hands of roughly 2% of the population, the other 98%, which is everyone else, have the freedom to specialize, which has contributed to the development of fields such as technology, medicine, and education. Now, that sounds fantastic. Yes, we've had an advancement in technology, medicine, and education, but at what cost? There's got to be a balance. Nevertheless, the convenience generated by the industrialization of our food system comes at tremendously great cost of physical and mental health, as well as the health of our planet. So those advances, are they really advances? Because we see now that we're kind of going backwards in terms of our health, mental health, etc., even with those advances. In 1937, George Orwell said, "We may find in the long run that tin food is a deadlier weapon than the machine gun," which is a very good, true statement. Unfortunately, as chronic diet-related illnesses such as type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease have become two of the leading causes of death in our world today, Orwell's words seem prophetic. Okay, so coming to the just last few things in this chapter, cheap food is a mirage. There's so many side consequences. We need to take responsibility and fight for a better meal. So the next part of the chapter, I talk about what I spoke in the beginning about using our voices, our dollars, our money, both with our forks. You can say when we see places like Costco and some of the big supermarkets starting to introduce a lot more healthier food options, good organic and good farm to table, because there is a demand for it. So you, by what you choose to purchase, you create a demand. Okay, so that's a long walk through the first few chapters. It's a huge subject, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're going to take this seriously and really dive in and send us your feedback and your testimonies of how your life is changing over the next 63 days. And as you join me in this mission to change, to become real stewards of creation and of our body. Okay, so just to also remind you, I have my conference in December on the 6th and the 7th of December in Dallas. It's a mental health symposium. We are going to be talking about all kinds of things related to mental health for teenagers, for adults, how to manage anxiety, depression, how to get to the root of that. I'm super excited about that. Go to the show notes to go and see more information on that. And also, last thing, please join me and partner with me in my research initiative where I'm doing research to help people to improve their mental health. And you can find more about that in our show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye, everyone.